Why was she standing alone at the gate, dressed like a nobody? The wind came from the west, carrying dust and the promise of rain. It cut across the high desert, whipping through the barbed wire, rattling the chain-link fences of Fort Jericho like a warning. General Anna Sharma stood just beyond the main entrance, her gray shirt damp with sweat, her black cargo pants unmarked by rank or insignia. She had just finished a 5-mile run along the perimeter road. Out here, beyond the gates, she was anonymous, a ghost, a woman in workout clothes, nothing more. Inside those walls, she commanded thousands. Out here, she was invisible. And she preferred it that way. Her breathing was steady, controlled. Her muscles burned with that clean exhaustion that came from pushing the body to its limits. The weight of command felt lighter out here. No briefings, no decisions that could cost lives. Just the rhythm of her feet on the asphalt, the cadence of her breath, the simplicity of movement. She watched the 3 young men loitering near the guardhouse. They were new, fresh from advanced infantry training. Their shoulders were thrown back too far, chests puffed out with the kind of confidence that hadn't been tested yet. They laughed too loud, moved too carelessly. One of them, tall with a jawline set in a permanent sneer, kicked a rock across the pavement. It skittered toward her feet. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at her. To him, she was part of the scenery, as insignificant as the sagebrush clinging to life along the roadside. Sharma's expression didn't change. She had seen thousands of boys like him. They came to the military seeking validation, a place to prove something. They mistook aggression for strength, loudness for leadership. Most of them learned. Some didn't. The ones who didn't became liabilities, their egos more dangerous than any enemy they'd ever face. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. Long shadows stretched from the guard towers, distorting everything they touched. The air grew cooler. The storm was coming. Inside the guardhouse, Sergeant Eva Rostova sat at her monitors, her face lit by the pale green glow of the screens. She was a professional, 20 years in the service. Her eyes missed nothing. She saw the privates. She saw the lone woman, and she saw the potential for something stupid to happen. Sharma took a slow breath, drawing the dry air deep into her lungs. It was a centering exercise, a habit forged in places far more dangerous than this. The impulse to correct them, to use the weight of her rank to remind them of their place, was there. But authority asserted was authority diminished. True command wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the calmest. The 3 men finally noticed her. Their conversation faltered. Their attention shifted to the silent figure standing just beyond the yellow line painted on the road. Their eyes scanned her, taking in the plain clothes, the athletic build, the absence of any identifying marks. They saw a civilian, a woman, an outsider. An easy target. The tall one, whose name she would later learn was Cadden Thorne, took a step forward. A smirk played on his lips. He saw a challenge where none was offered. He was about to make a mistake that would redefine his entire military career. He just didn't know it yet. Anna Sharma simply watched him approach, her body still, her mind a placid lake waiting. Fort Jericho was built on the assumption of overwhelming power. The perimeter walls rose 30 feet high, topped with coils of razor wire that glittered in the fading light. Every few hundred yards, automated sentry turrets sat dormant, their optical sensors sweeping in silent, overlapping arcs. This was a fortress, a bastion of technological might designed to project force outward and repel any threat from without. For the soldiers stationed here, particularly the new arrivals, this environment bred a sense of invincibility. They were insulated from the consequences of the world outside, and in that vacuum, their own importance swelled. Privates Thorne, Miller, and Graves were textbook examples. They had graduated at the top of their training cycle. Their physical scores were exemplary. They had been told they were the tip of the spear, the sharpest instruments in the nation's arsenal. They believed it. Their swagger wasn't entirely unearned, but it was untested. They mistook simulated success for genuine competence. Sergeant Rostova observed them from her post, a frown creasing her brow. She had seen their type before. They treated every interaction as a dominance contest. They called senior non-commissioned officers Sarge, with a familiarity that bordered on disrespect. They viewed regulations as suggestions meant for lesser soldiers. They had been on base for less than a week and had already accumulated 2 formal complaints for their behavior in the mess hall. "Look at this," Thorne murmured to his friends, his voice a low rumble meant to carry. He gestured with his chin toward Sharma. "Lost your way, ma'am." His use of the word ma'am was deliberate mockery, the inflection turning a term of respect into an insult. Miller and Graves chuckled, thin, sycophantic laughter. They were planets orbiting Thorne's ego, reflecting his light. Sharma offered no reaction. Her focus was on the details. The way Thorne stood with his weight shifted to his lead foot, a brawler's stance. The way Miller kept glancing nervously toward the guardhouse, aware on some level that they were crossing a line. Graves was the most passive, his participation limited to a weak smile, eager for inclusion but wary of the consequences. "Maybe she wants a tour," Miller added, gaining a sliver of confidence from Sharma's silence. "We could show you the good spots, the obstacle course, maybe see if you can handle it." Their words were a form of probing, testing for a reaction. They expected indignation, fear, a flustered retreat. They were prepared for any of these, ready with a follow-up volley of insults. They were not prepared for stillness. They were not prepared for a gaze that seemed to look straight through them, analyzing the structural weaknesses in their bravado. Sergeant Rostova reached for the intercom handset, her thumb hovering over the button. Protocol dictated that she intervene, that she order the privates to return to their barracks and cease harassing a civilian, but something stayed her hand. It was the woman's posture. It was utterly devoid of fear. There was no tension in her shoulders, no defensive clenching of her fists. She was as calm as the eye of the coming storm, an island of tranquility in a sea of adolescent posturing. Rostova decided to wait, to observe. This felt less like harassment, and more like a predator cautiously circling something it didn't understand. The institutional culture of Fort Jericho, for all its talk of discipline and respect, often tolerated this kind of low-level thuggery, especially from promising young soldiers. It was seen as boys being boys, a harmless way to blow off steam. It was a blind spot Anna Sharma had been working to correct since she took command. She knew that the culture of an army was not defined by its regulations, but by the worst behavior it was willing to tolerate. The underestimation was a palpable force, an atmospheric pressure Sharma could feel on her skin. It was woven from a tapestry of assumptions, her gender, her plain clothes, her quiet demeanor. In their world of rigid hierarchies and visible markers of power, she registered as a null value. A zero. Thorne took another step, closing the distance until he was only a few feet away. Close enough that she could see the acne scars on his jaw, smell the cheap energy drink on his breath. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a tone that was meant to sound conspiratorial but came across as predatory. "Civilians aren't really supposed to be wandering around out here. It's a security thing." He was improvising now, trying to construct a narrative where his harassment had a legitimate purpose. "Maybe we should escort you back to wherever you came from," Graves offered, finding his voice for the first time. His tone was less aggressive than Thorne's, but the intention was the same. They wanted her gone. They wanted her embarrassed. They wanted to feel powerful. Sharma's gaze shifted to Graves. He wilted under the weight of it. There was something in her eyes that he couldn't name. Not anger, not fear, something older, something earned. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. What happened next, no one expected. The lights went out. Not just the lights at the gate, all of them. The entire base plunged into darkness. The hum of the electrical grid, a constant background noise so ubiquitous it was rarely noticed, suddenly ceased. The silence was deafening. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. The automated sentry turrets powered down mid-sweep, their optical sensors going dark. Inside the guardhouse, Sergeant Rostova's monitors flickered and died, leaving her in complete blackness. Emergency protocols kicked in immediately. Red battery-powered lights began to glow along the perimeter fence, casting everything in a hellish crimson hue. Thorne spun around, his swagger evaporating in an instant. What the hell? Miller stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Graves went pale, his eyes wide with sudden, genuine fear. Sharma didn't move. She had felt it coming. Not the blackout specifically, but something. The air had changed. The storm had arrived, but not the one she'd expected. From somewhere deep within the base came the sound of alarms. Distant, muted by the thick concrete walls, but unmistakable. This wasn't a drill. Rostova's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, strained but controlled. Gate security, this is Guard House 1. We have a total power failure. All systems are down. I repeat, all systems are down. Backup generators should engage in 60 seconds. Hold your positions. But the backup generators didn't engage. 60 seconds passed, then 90, then 2 minutes. The darkness remained absolute, broken only by those eerie red emergency lights that made everyone look like shadows, like ghosts. Thorne was no longer focused on Sharma. His training, shallow as it was, had kicked in. He turned to his friends. We need to secure the gate. If something's happening, this is where they'll hit. It was the first intelligent thing he'd said all night. Miller nodded, fumbling for the rifle slung across his back. Graves did the same, his hands shaking. Sharma watched them scramble. She noted the way they moved without coordination, the way they didn't establish fields of fire, the way they clustered together instead of spreading out. They were reacting, not thinking. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong, the faint scrape of metal on concrete, coming from the north side of the perimeter fence beyond the circle of red light. Her head turned, her body coiling like a spring. Years of training, years of combat, years of staying alive in places where hesitation meant death, all condensed into a single moment of pure, focused awareness. "Contact north," she said quietly. Thorne spun toward her, confusion and irritation warring on his face. "What?" "North fence, 200 meters, 3, maybe 4 hostiles, moving toward the secondary gate." "How the hell would you?" She raised a hand, silencing him, not with authority, with certainty. "Listen." They listened, and in the silence they heard it too, the unmistakable sound of boots on gravel, the soft clink of equipment, movement where there shouldn't be any. Rostova's voice crackled again, tighter now. "Guard House 1 to all posts. We have unconfirmed movement on the north fence. I repeat, unconfirmed movement. QRF is mobilizing, but comms are compromised. Gate team, maintain defensive posture." Thorne's face had gone from cocky to pale in the span of seconds. This was real. This was happening. "We need to lock down the gate," Miller said, his voice cracking. "We need to call for backup," Graves added. But the radios were dead. The phones were dead. Everything that ran on the base's power grid was dead. Sharma moved then, not hurried, not panicked. She walked calmly to the gate control panel, a hardened metal box mounted on the wall of the guardhouse. She knelt beside it, her fingers finding the manual release mechanism in the darkness. With a sharp yank, she pulled the lever. The gate's magnetic locks disengaged with a heavy clunk. The gate itself didn't move, but now it could be manually secured from the inside. "Help me," she said, her voice cutting through their panic. Thorne stared at her. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's done this before. Now move." There was something in her tone that left no room for argument, not pleading, not demanding, simply stating a fact. Thorn moved. Together they pushed the heavy gate closed. The hinges groaned, protesting the manual operation, but it swung into place. Sharma pulled a heavy chain from the guardhouse storage locker and threaded it through the gate, securing it with a padlock the size of her fist. "That won't hold if they have breaching charges," Miller said, his voice hollow. "It doesn't need to hold forever," Sharma replied. "It just needs to slow them down." She turned to face the darkness beyond the fence. Her eyes had adjusted now. The red emergency lights created deep pockets of shadow, but she could make out shapes, movement. They were coming. And then the rain began to fall. First a few scattered drops, then a deluge. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke. Within seconds they were all soaked. The water ran in rivulets down Sharma's face, plastering her dark hair to her skull. She didn't flinch, didn't wipe her eyes. She just watched. Why wasn't she running? The three privates stood frozen, rifles in hand, staring out into the rain-soaked darkness. Somewhere out there, beyond the fence, beyond the red glow of the emergency lights, something was moving toward them. Something that had chosen this exact moment when the base was blind and deaf to strike. Thorn's hands were shaking, not from cold, from fear. The kind of fear that came from realizing how little you actually knew, how unprepared you actually were. Miller was breathing too fast, hyperventilating. His finger was on the trigger of his rifle, but his barrel was pointed at the ground. Graves had gone silent. His eyes darted from shadow to shadow, seeing threats in every shape. And then Sharma saw them. 4 figures moving low and fast along the perimeter fence. They wore black, their faces covered. They moved with the kind of efficiency that came from training, real training, not the sterile simulations these boys had experienced. This was practiced, rehearsed, executed. They were breaching the fence. Sharma could see the dull glint of wire cutters in the hands of the lead figure. He was working quickly, methodically, snipping through the chain link. The others provided cover, their weapons raised, scanning for threats. "Ristova," Sharma called out, her voice cutting through the rain. "Intruders breaching North Fence, Section 12. 4 hostiles, armed. Advise you sound the alarm manually." Inside the guardhouse, Ristova grabbed the manual alarm lever, a relic from a bygone era when everything wasn't computerized. She pulled it down with all her strength. A klaxon wail erupted across the base, a primal sound that cut through the storm and the darkness. The 4 figures froze. Then they moved faster. The lead breacher finished cutting and pulled the section of fence back, creating an opening. They were through in seconds, moving toward the gate with purpose. Thorn raised his rifle, his hand still shaking. "We need to engage." "No," Sharma said firmly. "What? They're coming right at us." "You'll miss in this darkness. You'll waste ammunition, and you'll reveal our exact position." "Then what do we do?" Miller's voice was rising in pitch, panic edging in. Sharma's mind was working through the tactical situation with cold precision. 4 hostiles, armed, moving with coordination. They had timed this attack perfectly, waited for the power outage. That meant intelligence, planning. This wasn't random. The gate was secure, but a determined team with breaching tools could get through it in under a minute. The guardhouse was hardened, but it had windows, vulnerabilities. The quick reaction force was mobilizing, but without comms, they were operating blind. It would take them at least 5 minutes to reach the gate, maybe longer in this storm. 5 minutes was an eternity. She needed to buy time. She needed to disrupt their plan. She needed to make them hesitate. "Give me your rifle," she said to Thorn. He stared at her. "What?" "Your rifle now." There was steel in her voice, command that brooked no argument. Thorn hesitated for only a second, then handed it over. She checked the chamber, confirmed a round was loaded, flicked off the safety with muscle memory. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, an extension of her will. She moved to the corner of the guardhouse, using the structure for cover. The four figures were 50 meters away now, closing fast. She could see them more clearly in the red light. Military-grade equipment, NVGs mounted on their helmets. These weren't amateurs. She needed to change their calculus, make them think twice. She sighted down the barrel, her breathing slow and controlled. The rain hammered against her back. Thunder rolled across the desert. The wind howled through the fence. And in that chaos she found stillness. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the night. The round sparked off the pavement 5 meters in front of the lead hostile. Not a miss, a warning. The four figures dove for cover, rolling behind a concrete barrier near the vehicle checkpoint. Sharma fired again, another warning shot, this one closer. The message was clear: approach at your own risk. For a long moment nothing happened. The hostiles stayed behind cover. Sharma stayed behind hers. The rain continued to fall. The klaxon continued to wail. Then movement, but not from the hostiles. From inside the base. Headlights, multiple vehicles cutting through the darkness. The quick reaction force had arrived. The four hostiles saw them too. She watched as they communicated with hand signals, barely visible in the red light. They were reassessing. Their window was closing. One of them raised a weapon, not toward her, toward the guardhouse. Sharma saw it happening in slow motion. The angle, the intent. They were going to suppress the position, pin them down while they either retreated or attempted another approach. She couldn't allow that. She shifted her aim and fired. Not a warning shot this time. Center mass. The hostile jerked backward, his weapon clattering to the ground. The others immediately returned fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness. Rounds sparked off the metal corner of the guardhouse inches from Sharma's head. She pulled back into cover, counted to 3, then leaned out and fired again. 2 shots, controlled, precise. Another hostile went down. The remaining 2 broke contact. They were running now back toward the hole in the fence, abandoning their wounded. But they weren't fast enough. The convoy from the quick reaction force had reached the gate. Armed soldiers poured out, their weapons raised, their movements sharp and professional. They fanned out, establishing a perimeter. It was over in seconds. The 2 fleeing hostiles were cut off, surrounded. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The 2 wounded hostiles were secured where they lay, zip-tied and searched. And through it all, Sharma stood in the rain, the rifle still in her hands, water streaming down her face. She had done this before, in places far worse than this, in darkness deeper than this, against enemies more dangerous than this. This had just been Tuesday. The convoy had come to a halt just inside the gate. Doors flew open and soldiers from the quick reaction force poured out, establishing a secure perimeter. At their head was a full colonel, his uniform somehow still immaculate despite the rain. His name was Marcus Thorne, Caden Thorne's uncle, the base's second in command. Colonel Thorne's eyes swept the scene. The neutralized intruders, the secured weapons. His nephew, standing there drenched and breathing heavily, a dazed look on his face. Then his gaze fell upon the woman holding the rifle. His eyes widened in shock. His entire body went rigid. In an instant, his back straightened. His heels clicked together on the wet asphalt. He snapped the sharpest salute of his career. "General Sharma," he barked, his voice ringing with shock and deference. We didn't know. The entire system went down. We came as soon as the generators were online." The name hung in the air. Heavy, irrefutable. "General." Caden Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. His knees went weak. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He looked from his saluting uncle to the woman, the quiet, unassuming woman he had mocked, harassed, challenged. General Anna Sharma, the installation commander. His commanding general. A living legend whose operational record was whispered about in awe in training barracks and briefing rooms across the military. He felt a wave of nausea so intense he thought he might be sick. Miller and Graves, standing near the guardhouse, looked as though they had been turned to stone. Their faces were ashen, their eyes wide with a terror that went far beyond any physical threat. They hadn't just broken the rules. They had insulted a deity in their small, insulated world. Sergeant Rostova, however, merely nodded slowly to herself. The pieces clicked into place. The calm, the competence, the quiet authority, it all made sense now. She hadn't been witnessing a civilian in distress. She had been witnessing a master at work. General Sharma returned the colonel's salute with a curt, economical motion. "Report, Colonel." Her voice betrayed no emotion. It was the same calm, even tone she had used all night. "Primary power grid was sabotaged," Colonel Thorne reported, his words clipped and precise. "Looks like they used an electromagnetic pulse device locally, right at the substation. The breach on the north fence was a diversion. This was the main infiltration point." "They were likely targeting the command and control servers," Sharma stated simply. "They failed." She gestured to the 4 neutralized men. "These are your primary targets. Get them to interrogation. I want to know who sent them and what their objective was before sunrise." She then looked at Sergeant Rostova. "Sergeant, your performance in maintaining the physical security of this gate under extreme conditions was exemplary. You followed your training and showed initiative. You will be commended." Rostova stood taller, a flicker of pride in her tired eyes. "Thank you, General." Finally, Sharma's gaze settled on Caden Thorne and his 2 friends. She walked slowly toward them, the water squelching in her running shoes. She stopped directly in front of Thorne. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the ground, at her feet, anywhere but at the face of the woman whose career he had tried to mock before his own had even truly begun. The cultural perception of an entire military base was shifting in that single, silent moment. The story would spread like wildfire. The new hotshot recruits who picked a fight with the base commander and lived to regret it. The institutional tolerance for casual arrogance and ego had just met a hard, unyielding stop. The consequences were falling, not with a shout but with a quiet, devastating certainty. General Sharma looked at the 3 privates. Caden Thorne was trembling, his face a mess of shame and fear. Miller and Graves were rigid with terror, bracing for an impact that would shatter their futures. The air crackled with the unspoken power dynamic, the vast chasm between her 4 stars and their single chevron. The surrounding soldiers of the Quick Reaction Force watched in silence, their faces grim. They knew what a public dressing down from a general looked like. It was a career-ending event. But Sharma didn't raise her voice. She didn't lecture them on discipline or respect. She simply looked at Thorne. "You have good instincts," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden stillness. The unexpected praise was more disorienting than any reprimand. Thorne looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "When the threat was real, you acted," she continued. "You didn't hesitate. You put yourself at risk to defend this post. You followed direct tactical instruction under fire. That is the mark of a soldier." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Everything you did before that was the mark of a fool." The words landed like hammer blows. Your ego was a liability. It made you blind. It made you reckless. It almost made you a casualty. She then addressed all 3 of them. "You will report to Sergeant Rostova at 500 hours for remedial training. You will spend the next month on gate duty, sanitation detail, and every other menial task she can find for you. You will learn what it means to serve, not what it means to posture. You will learn that strength is not about how hard you can hit, but how much control you have when you are challenged." She turned to Colonel Thorne. "Colonel, ensure their records reflect a formal counseling for conduct unbecoming, but no further punitive action. They are more valuable to this army once they have learned this lesson than they would be if we simply discarded them. The colonel nodded, a look of immense relief mixed with respect on his face. Yes, General. The justice she dispensed was not about revenge. It was about correction. It was about salvaging 3 potentially good soldiers from their own worst instincts. It was a demonstration of her core philosophy. Strength was a responsibility, not a privilege. She looked back at Caden Thorne one last time. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, humbling awareness. In his eyes, she saw the faint glimmer of the man he could become, now that the boy had been so thoroughly demolished. The respect she had earned was not born of fear of her rank, but of a profound, undeniable demonstration of her competence, her restraint, and her wisdom. The shift was complete. The quiet authority had won. She turned away, her duty here done, and walked toward the waiting command vehicle, leaving the soldiers, the rain, and the wreckage of 3 shattered egos behind her. The storm was passing. The first light of dawn was beginning to break over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. The emergency lights were still glowing red, but they seemed less ominous now, just markers in the aftermath. Inside the command vehicle, Sharma finally allowed herself a moment, just one. She closed her eyes and took a breath. Her body ached. Her clothes were soaked. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving behind the familiar weight of exhaustion. But there was work to do. There was always work to do. She opened a secure laptop and began typing her after-action report. The words flowed with practiced efficiency. Factual, dispassionate. The who, what, when, where, and how of the incident, the successes, the failures, the lessons to be learned. She didn't mention the 3 privates by name in the report. That wasn't necessary. They would face their consequences through the proper channels. What mattered was that the base had been defended. The intruders had been captured. The mission had been accomplished. As she typed, her mind was already moving forward, analyzing the attack, the timing, the coordination, the equipment. This wasn't the work of opportunistic criminals or local insurgents. This was professional, well-funded, which meant it was part of something larger. Someone wanted access to Fort Jericho's command and control systems. Someone with resources and intelligence capabilities. The question was who, and more importantly, why now? These were questions that would require answers, quickly. She finished the report and sent it up the chain of command. Then she pulled up the interrogation schedules. The 4 captured hostiles would be processed through proper channels, medical treatment for the wounded, then interrogation. She wanted to be present for that, not conducting it but observing. Sometimes what people didn't say was more important than what they did. A knock on the vehicle's door pulled her from her thoughts. Enter. Colonel Thorne stepped inside, his expression carefully neutral. General, the perimeter is secure. The engineers have identified the sabotage point. Imp device as suspected. Small, portable, military grade. Someone planted it on the substation transformer sometime in the last 24 hours. Surveillance footage. Wiped, they knew where the cameras were, knew how to avoid them. Inside job, Sharma said flatly. Possibly. We're conducting a full security review. Everyone who had access to that area in the last week is being interviewed. Sharma nodded. What about the backup generators? That's the concerning part, ma'am. They were physically disabled. Someone cut the fuel lines, drained the tanks. That required direct access to a restricted area. So we have at least one insider, maybe more. Yes, ma'am. The implications were clear. This wasn't just an external attack. There was rot inside the wire. Someone at Fort Jericho had betrayed their oath, had provided intelligence, access, maybe even active assistance. Finding them would be her top priority. Colonel, I want a full roster review. Every person assigned to this base. Cross-reference access logs, duty schedules, financial records, communications. Find me the anomalies. Yes, General, we're already on it. Good, and Colonel. Ma'am. Your nephew. He showed courage tonight when it mattered. That's something to build on. Make sure his remedial training focuses on that. The Colonel's expression softened slightly. Thank you, General, I will. He saluted and left. Sharma sat alone in the command vehicle, the morning light growing stronger outside. She thought about Cadden Thorne, about Miller and Graves, about all the young men and women who came to the military seeking purpose, identity, a place to belong. They were raw material, unformed. What they became depended on the guidance they received, the examples they followed, the culture they were immersed in. She had been raw material once too, a long time ago. She remembered what it felt like to be cocky, untested, to mistake swagger for strength. She remembered the moment that illusion was shattered, not in a firefight, not in combat, but in a quiet conversation with a master sergeant who had seen more, done more, survived more than she could imagine. He had looked at her with the same steady gaze she had given those three privates tonight. And he had said simply, "You're not special, you're just loud. Now let me show you what special actually looks like." That lesson had saved her life more times than she could count. Now it was her turn to pass it on. The sun had fully risen by the time Sharma stepped out of the command vehicle. The base was returning to normal operations. Power had been restored, the damage assessed, the breach repaired. Soldiers moved with purpose, returning to their duties. At the gate, Sergeant Rostova was still at her post. She hadn't gone off shift, hadn't taken a break, just stayed there maintaining her watch. Sharma walked over to her. "Sergeant." Rostova stood. "General." "Go home, get some rest. You've earned it." "Yes, ma'am, but first, if I may speak freely." "Always." Rostova hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Those three privates, Thorne, Miller, Graves, they're idiots, ma'am, but they're not bad, not really, just young, just stupid." "I know. You could have destroyed them. One word from you and their careers would be over." "I could have," Sharma agreed. "But then what? We lose three potential soldiers because they made a mistake, because they didn't know any better." Rostova smiled slightly. "That's why you're the general, ma'am, and I'm just a sergeant." "You're not just anything, Rostova. You held this gate. You made the right calls. You're the reason this didn't turn into a complete disaster." "I was just doing my job, ma'am." "That's what good soldiers say." Rostova nodded, then saluted and headed toward her quarters. Sharma watched her go, then turned back toward the base. There was still so much to do: interviews to conduct, reports to review, security protocols to update. But for just a moment, she allowed herself to feel something close to satisfaction. The base was secure, the threat had been neutralized, the lesson had been taught. And maybe, just maybe, three young soldiers had learned something that would shape the rest of their careers. That was worth more than any punishment she could have inflicted. 6 months later, Cadden Thorne stood at attention in General Sharma's office. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect. The arrogance that had defined him on that rainy night was gone, replaced by something harder, more genuine. "Private Thorne," Sharma said, looking up from the file on her desk. "Your performance evaluations have been consistently excellent. Your platoon sergeant speaks highly of your leadership potential. Sergeant Rostova says you've become one of her most reliable gate guards." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm recommending you for a lateral transfer to the Security Forces training program. It's a competitive program, difficult, but I think you have what it takes." Thorne's eyes widened slightly. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just don't waste the opportunity." "I won't, General, I promise." Sharma stood and extended her hand. Thorne shook it, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Dismissed." He saluted and turned to leave, but at the door he paused. "General." "Yes." "That night at the gate, I was an idiot." "Yes, you were. I've been thinking about it, a lot, about what you said, about strength being control, not force. And I think I'm starting to understand." Sharma nodded. "That's a good start, Thorn. Keep thinking about it. You'll spend the rest of your career trying to master it." He smiled slightly. "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Sharma returned to her desk. She had 3 more personnel reviews to complete, a briefing on base security upgrades, and a conference call with regional command. But she took a moment to look out the window. The desert stretched out endlessly, harsh and beautiful. The sun was setting again, painting everything in that familiar bruised orange and purple. Somewhere out there beyond the wire, threats were forming. Enemies were planning. The work was never done. But inside these walls, soldiers were learning, growing, becoming something more than they were. That was the real mission. Not just defending against threats, but building defenders who understood what they were defending, why it mattered, what it cost. She thought about all the boys and girls who would come through Fort Jericho, all the raw material that would be shaped by the culture she was creating. Some would wash out, some would excel, but all of them would be touched by the standards she set, by the worst behavior she was willing to tolerate, by the best example she could provide. It was heavy work, exhausting work, the kind that wore you down from the inside. But it was the only work that mattered. Discipline is the space between impulse and action. It's the breath you take before you speak, the count to 3 before you move, the choice to wait, to watch, to understand before you respond. It's the hardest thing to master because it feels like weakness, like hesitation, like letting others control you. But it's not. It's the difference between a soldier and a weapon, between command and compliance, between strength and force. Anna Sharma learned that lesson the hard way, in places where hesitation meant death, but so did recklessness, where the enemy wasn't always the one pointing a gun at you. Sometimes it was your own fear, your own anger, your own ego. She spent her entire career teaching that lesson to others, not through lectures, not through punishment, but through example, through showing that dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. That respect isn't demanded, it's earned. That true power is the power to choose restraint when force is available. It's a lesson that can't be taught in a classroom, can't be found in a manual. It has to be lived, experienced, forged in the moments when everything is falling apart and the only thing you can control is yourself. Those 3 privates at the gate thought they were strong. They thought they knew what power looked like, what command meant, what it took to be a soldier. They were wrong. But they learned. And in learning, they became something better than they were, something closer to what they could be. That's the real victory, not the captured enemies, not the defended base, not the foiled attack. The real victory is the moment when someone understands that their worst instincts are not their best tools, when they choose control over chaos, when they realize that the hardest battles are fought inside your own head. General Anna Sharma understood that. She had fought those battles, won some, lost others, learned from all of them. And every day, she woke up and fought them again. Because that's what discipline is. Not a destination, not an achievement, but a practice, a choice, a commitment. The space between impulse and action. The breath before the storm. The calm at the center of everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.